What if I told you there was a country, a civilization so ancient, so wealthy, so mathematically advanced, that at one point in history, it held nearly a quarter of the entire world's wealth? A country that invented the number 0, a country where universities existed when Europe was still in the Dark Ages, a place so rich that explorers from the other side of the planet risked their lives on dangerous ocean voyages just to find it. And then, almost overnight, it was gone. Not destroyed by an asteroid, not wiped out by a plague, but slowly, deliberately, piece by piece, drained by an empire that turned the world's richest civilization into one of its poorest colonies. That country is India. But here's the thing, and stay with me until the very end because the final twist of this story will genuinely blow your mind. India didn't stay down. It bled, it starved, it was humiliated, and then it got back up. And today, in 2026, this same country stands as the world's 5th largest economy, with its eyes locked on the #1 spot. This is the story of how that happened. The real story, the parts they never taught you in school. And I promise you, the twist at the end, nobody sees it coming. Picture India in the year 1900. The British flag flies over the Red Fort in Delhi. In the port of Calcutta, British ships are being loaded with silk, spices, cotton, and raw materials, all headed to factories in England. Those factories will turn India's own resources into finished goods, and then sell them right back to India at a markup. It was one of the most calculated economic extractions in human history. The British weren't just ruling India, they were systematically hollowing it out. Indian artisans who had made the finest hand-woven cloth in the world found themselves out of work, undercut by cheap British machine-made fabric. Tax collectors squeezed villages dry. Famine swept across the subcontinent while grain was still being exported to England. But underneath all of that, something was stirring. In 1905, the British government announced the partition of Bengal, splitting one of India's most culturally rich provinces into 2. The British called it administrative efficiency. Indians called it divide and rule. And for the first time, the word independence started being spoken out loud in public. Protests erupted. People burned foreign cloth in the streets. A movement called Swadeshi, meaning of our own country, spread like wildfire. It wasn't just about cloth, it was about something far deeper. The radical idea that India belonged to Indians. Then came World War I. Britain conscripted over 1 million Indian soldiers to fight in Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. These men bled and died in Flanders, in Mesopotamia, in East Africa, fighting for a country that wasn't theirs, for a freedom that wasn't being offered to them. When they came home, nothing changed. They were still subjects, still second class in their own land. And then came the moment that changed everything. April 13th, 1919. Amritsar, a public garden called Jallianwala Bagh. Thousands of unarmed civilians, men, women, children, had gathered for a festival. British General Reginald Dyer marched in his troops, blocked the exits, and opened fire. No warning, no dispersal order, just bullets. The British government's official count said 379 people died. Independent historians believe the number was closer to 1,000. The garden had a well. People jumped in trying to escape the gunfire. They drowned. When news spread across India, something cracked open that could never be sealed again. Now let me introduce you to the most unlikely revolutionary in the history of the modern world. No army, no weapons, no palace. Just a frail man, a walking stick, and an idea so radical that the greatest empire on earth genuinely didn't know how to fight it. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. His weapon was non-violence. His strategy was simple and almost insane in its audacity. If the oppressor keeps hitting you and you refuse to hit back, eventually the whole world watches, and eventually the oppressor runs out of moral justification to keep going. In 1920, Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement. Millions of Indians walked away from British courts, British schools, and British government jobs. The machine of empire started grinding to a halt, not from the outside, but from within. Then came 1930, the Salt March. Gandhi walked 240 miles to the sea, picked up a handful of salt. I know what you're thinking. Salt? Really? But think about what it meant. The British had made it illegal for Indians to produce or collect their own salt. They taxed one of the most basic human necessities. Gandhi's act of picking up salt from the ocean was a direct, peaceful, public defiance of that law, and the image of that small, elderly man walking to the sea, followed by thousands, became one of the most powerful images in the history of resistance. But Gandhi wasn't the only voice. Subhash Chandra Bose believed that peaceful protest alone would never dislodge the British. He escaped to Germany, traveled to Japan, and formed the Indian National Army, a fighting force built from Indian prisoners of war. His words became legendary. Give me blood, and I shall give you freedom. Two different strategies, two different visions, both aimed at the same goal. After World War II, Britain was broke, exhausted, and morally discredited. India was on fire with resistance. The British finally understood the cost of holding India had become greater than any profit it could provide. On August 15, 1947, at the stroke of midnight, India was declared independent. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru stood before the nation and said, "Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge." But independence came wrapped in tragedy. Here's what most people don't talk about. At the exact moment of India's independence, the subcontinent was being cut in half. British lawyer Cyril Radcliffe was given just 5 weeks to draw a border that would divide India and create the new nation of Pakistan. 5 weeks to split apart communities, families, and land that had existed together for centuries. When those borders were announced, it triggered the largest mass migration in human history. 15 million people were uprooted overnight. Estimates suggest that between 1 and 2 million people were killed in the violence that followed. Gandhi, the man who had dedicated his entire life to peaceful coexistence, could not stop it. He wandered through the burning villages, fasting, begging people to stop killing each other. 5 months after independence, on January 30th, 1948, Gandhi was shot and killed by an assassin at a prayer meeting in New Delhi. The father of the nation didn't live to see its first birthday. The India that Nehru inherited was not a country. It was 500 plus princely states, dozens of languages, several religions, centuries of caste divisions, and a population of 350 million people, most of whom couldn't read. And Nehru made a choice that many thought was insane. He would build this into a democracy, not a dictatorship, not a one-party state, a full, messy, chaotic, glorious democracy with universal suffrage from day one. Every adult, regardless of gender, caste, or literacy, could vote. He launched 5-year economic plans, built steel plants, dams, and universities. He called them the temples of modern India. But 1962 brought wounds. China launched a surprise military attack on India's northern border. India was unprepared. The army was pushed back in humiliation. The defeat shattered Nehru. 2 years later, in 1964, he died. When Nehru's daughter Indira Gandhi became prime minister, the political establishment thought they could control her. A woman in politics, in 1966, they called her the dumb doll. They were spectacularly wrong. In 1971, East Pakistan erupted in a brutal civil war. Pakistani military forces committed what many historians classify as genocide against the Bengali population. 10 million refugees poured into India. Indira Gandhi made a call. India would go to war. 13 days, that's all it took. Pakistan's military surrendered. A new nation, Bangladesh, was born, and Indira Gandhi stood as one of the most powerful leaders on the planet. In 1974, India detonated its first nuclear device, the codename Smiling Buddha. The world suddenly had to recalibrate everything it thought it knew about India. But then came the darkest chapter. In 1975, India's High Court ruled that Indira Gandhi had violated election laws. Her response? She declared a national emergency, suspended the constitution, threw her political opponents in jail, and imposed press censorship. For 21 months, India's democracy went dark. And then, in what is still one of the most stunning moments in political history, she called an election in 1977 and lost badly. India's democracy, battered and bruised, proved it was still alive. She came back to power in 1980, but 1984 would become her final year. Armed militants had occupied the Golden Temple, Sikhism's holiest site. Indira Gandhi ordered a military assault. Operation Blue Star. The temple was damaged. Hundreds died. The Sikh community was devastated. 4 months later, on October 31st, 1984, Indira Gandhi was shot dead in her own garden by 2 of her own Sikh bodyguards. Her son, Rajiv Gandhi, took over, but his tenure was marked by catastrophe. The Bhopal gas disaster in 1984, when a Union Carbide pesticide plant leaked toxic gas into a sleeping city, killing thousands overnight, remains the world's worst industrial accident. Then came 1991. India hit rock bottom. The country's foreign exchange reserves fell so low that it could barely afford a few weeks of imports. In a humiliating move, India flew 20 tons of gold to the Bank of England as collateral for an emergency loan. 20 tons of gold. Into that crisis stepped an unlikely hero, a quiet, bespectacled economist named Manmohan Singh. As finance minister, he dismantled decades of protectionist policy, opened India's markets to foreign investment, and unleashed the private sector. It was India's economic Big Bang. Bangalore transformed into a global technology hub almost overnight. Companies like Infosys and TCS started landing billion-dollar contracts from American Fortune 500 companies. A new middle class began to emerge. Kids who grew up in villages started getting engineering degrees and moving into software jobs. Then 1998 brought another shock. India conducted 5 nuclear tests in rapid succession. The codename Operation Shakti. The United States imposed sanctions. Pakistan responded with its own nuclear tests. South Asia suddenly became the most dangerous nuclear flashpoint on the planet. And 1 year later, 1999, India and Pakistan went to war again in the mountains of Kargil. 2 nuclear-armed countries face to face in one of the highest altitude conflicts in military history. India won, but the world held its breath. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. After the Kargil War, instead of escalating, both India and Pakistan pulled back. two countries with nuclear weapons chose not to use them. Some historians argue that Kargil was actually the moment that solidified the doctrine of nuclear deterrence in South Asia. The very weapons that terrified the world may have, paradoxically, prevented a far larger catastrophe. The bomb that India tested in 1974, the one called Smiling Buddha, may have ultimately kept the peace. Think about that. The new millennium found India on an upward trajectory that nobody outside the country had fully anticipated. Bangalore was being called the Silicon Valley of the East. Indian engineers were writing code that powered American banks, hospitals, and airlines. The outsourcing revolution reshaped the global economy, and India was at the center of it. The Indian middle class exploded. Mobile phones reached villages that didn't have running water. Girls who would never have had access to higher education a generation earlier were going to engineering and medical schools. Hundreds of millions of people were being lifted out of extreme poverty, the fastest mass poverty reduction the world had ever seen. Then 2008 hit on two fronts. On one side, triumph. India's space agency ISRO launched Chandrayaan-1, its first lunar mission. That mission discovered water on the moon. Not confirmed water, discovered it. For the first time in human history. On the other side, horror. November 2008, Mumbai. 10 terrorists arrived by boat and launched coordinated attacks across the city. The Taj Mahal Hotel siege lasted 3 days. 166 people were killed. The attacks were broadcast live on television and watched by hundreds of millions worldwide. India mourned. And then India kept moving. In 2014, a man named Narendra Modi swept into power with one of the largest electoral mandates in Indian democratic history. His story was unlike any that had led to that office before. Born into a low-caste family, his father sold tea at a railway station. He himself worked as a chai vendor as a child. He rose through grassroots political organizing to become Chief Minister of Gujarat, and then Prime Minister of the world's largest democracy. His slogan, Ache Din, good days are coming. He launched Make in India, an initiative to transform the country into a global manufacturing powerhouse. He pushed Digital India, bringing government services directly to hundreds of millions of smartphones. In 2016, he made his most controversial economic move, demonetization. Overnight, he declared that 86% of India's currency was no longer legal tender. People had just hours to stand in line at banks to exchange their money. The stated goal was to flush out black market money and corruption. The result was economic chaos, long lines, and small businesses devastated. Economists argued about whether it worked. The debate continues today. In 2019, Modi won re-election by an even larger margin. Then came the Citizenship Amendment Act, which sparked massive protests. The revocation of Article 370, removing Kashmir's special autonomous status, celebrated by some as national integration, condemned by others as a violation of a region's rights. India was becoming more powerful, more confident, and more polarized. In 2020, COVID-19 struck. India imposed one of the world's strictest lockdowns with just 4 hours notice. Tens of millions of migrant workers found themselves stranded in cities with no buses, no trains, no money. Millions began walking home, some hundreds of miles. The images went around the world. It was heartbreaking. But within that same crisis, India showed what it could do. As the world's largest vaccine manufacturer, India produced and shipped hundreds of millions of doses globally. Countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America received Indian-made vaccines when they couldn't get them from anywhere else. The country that once flew its gold abroad to beg for a loan was now sending medicine to the world. August 23, 2023, 6:04 p.m. Indian Standard Time. Chandrayaan-3 touched down on the south pole of the moon. No country, not the United States, not Russia, not China, had ever landed there before. India did it first, and they did it for a fraction of the cost of comparable missions from other space agencies. When the landing was confirmed, people poured into the streets of cities across India. Scientists at ISRO Mission Control broke down in tears. That same year, India hosted the G20 summit, bringing together the leaders of the world's 20 largest economies. The message was unmistakable. India was no longer asking for a seat at the table, it was hosting the table. By 2026, India stands as the 5th largest economy globally, with the 3rd spot within reach. It is the world's most populous nation, with the youngest median age of any major economy. It is a space power capable of missions that rival NASA at 1/10 the cost. UPI. India's digital payment system now operates in over 50 countries, and it fields one of the largest standing armies on Earth. The problems remain enormous. Inequality, air pollution so severe that Indian cities rank among the most polluted on the planet, religious tensions that periodically erupt into violence. Hundreds of millions still without reliable access to clean water. India is not a finished story. It is a civilization in the middle of becoming. Now here's the twist I promised you at the very beginning, and this one is going to stay with you. In the year 1700, before British colonization fully took hold, India's share of global GDP was approximately 24%. China was around 22%. Great Britain, less than 3%. India wasn't just a wealthy country, it was the wealthiest region on Earth. By 1947, when the British finally left, India's share of global GDP had collapsed to just 4%. 200 years of colonial rule had transferred a staggering amount of wealth out of the subcontinent. One economist estimated the total extraction at approximately $45 trillion in today's money. And now, in 2026, India's economy has officially surpassed the United Kingdom. The colony has economically overtaken its colonizer, not through revenge, not through war, but through software engineers, rocket scientists, street-level entrepreneurs, and 1 billion people who simply refuse to stop believing in what their country could become. History, it turns out, has a very long memory, and sometimes an extraordinary sense of poetic justice. And that is the story of India. From the richest civilization on Earth, to a colony stripped of everything, to a nuclear power, a space power, and one of the fastest growing major economies the world has ever seen, all within a single century. It is not a perfect story. There are chapters in this history that are painful, controversial, and unresolved. But it is, without question, one of the most extraordinary comebacks in the history of human civilization. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Which country's history should we cover next? China, Russia, Japan, the Ottoman Empire? Let me know, because every single suggestion gets read. And if you want to keep getting stories like this one, history that actually feels like a thriller, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications, because the next video is already in the works. And trust me, it has a twist that makes this one look like a warm-up. I'll see you in the next one.